I grew up being the responsible one in my family, though it never earned me much recognition. While my sister Danielle charmed everyone with her dramatic stories and bold personality, I was the one who quietly paid my bills on time, built decent credit, and stayed out of trouble. My parents adored Danielle's flair and often dismissed me as the serious one, which made me feel invisible. I didn't resent her, but I always sensed that my reliability was taken for granted. It was almost as though my steadiness existed only to balance out her chaos, a silent backdrop to her louder life. For years, I accepted that role, never imagining how it would make me the perfect target for her biggest betrayal. Danielle's financial habits had always been questionable. She had a tendency to live far beyond her means, with new cars, designer purses, and spontaneous vacations that no one understood how she afforded. When asked, she brushed off concerns with vague explanations about promotions, side hustles, or friends helping out. Meanwhile, I worked steadily as an office manager, budgeting carefully to maintain stability. I had a modest apartment, a reliable car, and a growing savings account. Stability mattered to me because it was mine, hard-earned, built without shortcuts. I assumed Danielle's choices would eventually catch up to her, but I never thought she would drag me down with her. The first signs that something was wrong appeared subtle. I started receiving strange letters addressed to me, but about accounts I didn't recognize. At first, I chalked it up to junk mail or clerical errors. But when a credit card bill arrived showing charges in states I hadn't visited, my stomach twisted. I called the company immediately and explained it must have been fraud. They promised to investigate, and I believed it was an isolated incident. I never considered that the person behind it wasn't a stranger, but someone sitting across the table at family dinners. Looking back, Danielle's nervous glances when I mentioned identity theft should have told me everything. Months later, I got a call from a mortgage company asking why my payments were late. I thought it was a scam. I didn't own a home. I rented a small, cozy apartment downtown. When the representative insisted they had my signature and employment details on a $400,000 loan, I froze. My mind scrambled through possibilities, none of which made sense. How could my information be tied to a house I didn't even know existed? The rep sent over copies of documents with my name, social security number, and employer listed. But the handwriting wasn't mine. My chest tightened as a horrifying realization dawned. Someone I trusted had stolen not just my name, but my financial identity. My first instinct was disbelief. I drove straight to my parents' house where Danielle happened to be lounging on the couch like nothing was wrong. I confronted her with shaking hands, holding the paperwork in front of her. She barely flinched. Instead, she sighed dramatically and said, "Well, I was going to tell you eventually." I stared at her, my voice trembling as I asked what she had done. She smiled nervously and admitted she had used my credit to buy her dream house. Because the bank never would have approved me otherwise. My knees nearly gave out as I listened, unable to comprehend her casual tone, as though she had borrowed a sweater instead of my entire identity. Danielle tried to justify it by saying she knew I had good credit to spare and that family should help each other. Her words stung. Family, in her eyes, meant I was responsible for cleaning up her recklessness. She leaned in with an entitled smirk and added, "Besides, it's not like you are going to buy a house anytime soon. You're too careful, too boring." The insult cut deeper than the crime itself. For years, I had been dismissed as the dependable background character. And now she had weaponized my stability for her benefit. It wasn't just financial theft, a declaration that my worth existed only to serve her wants. I sat there in silence, my anger warring with shock. My parents, overhearing the confrontation, rushed into the room. Instead of condemning Danielle, they urged me to be understanding. My mother said, "She's your sister, and she finally has a chance at happiness. You should be proud you could help her." Proud? My entire future was hanging by a thread, and they wanted me to feel proud? I tried to explain the legal and financial consequences: ruined credit, debt collectors, possible criminal charges, but they waved it off like I was overreacting. For the first time, I realized just how invisible I had been all along. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, frantic phone calls, and meetings with banks. Every step I took to untangle the fraud, Danielle seemed to double down on her narrative that I was being selfish. She told relatives that I was sabotaging her happiness, painting herself as the victim of a jealous sister. Even my parents began parroting her words, calling me rigid, ungrateful, and cold-hearted. The betrayal weighed heavier each day, not only from Danielle, but from a family that refused to see me as more than the reliable one they could exploit. For the first time in my life, I realized I was utterly alone within my own bloodline. I wanted to disappear, to walk away from all of it, but the mortgage company's letters piled up and debt collectors started calling. I couldn't afford to ignore this. Danielle had tied me to a house I had never stepped foot in, and if I didn't act, my entire financial future would crumble. That realization pushed me out of despair and into determination. If no one in my family would stand beside me, I would have to stand for myself. For the first time, I stopped asking for their validation and began seeking real help from people who saw me not as a background character, but as someone worth fighting for. That's when my friend Sarah stepped in. She had watched me unravel over the past months and insisted I talk to a lawyer she knew. I hesitated, afraid of what it would mean to take legal action against my own sister. But Sarah looked me straight in the eye and said, "If she stole your future, you have every right to take it back." Her words cut through the fog of guilt and hesitation my family had planted in me. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future where Danielle faced the consequences and where I reclaimed the life she had tried to erase. Meeting the lawyer Sarah recommended was both terrifying and liberating. His name was Mr. Collins, a calm, deliberate man who listened without judgment as I laid out everything Danielle had done. I expected him to scold me for waiting so long to act, but instead he nodded thoughtfully and said, "You've been carrying this alone for too long. It's time the system carries its share." For the first time, someone validated what I had been feeling. This wasn't just sibling conflict, but fraud. He explained how identity theft cases could be pursued, the documentation I needed, and the possibility of reporting Danielle to the authorities. Hearing the word authorities made me shiver, but also gave me a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in months. I spent days gathering every piece of evidence: credit reports, debt collection letters, the forged mortgage application, all neatly organized in folders I labeled with trembling hands. Each page felt like a piece of my life that Danielle had stolen, and now I was taking them back. I remember staying up until dawn one night, highlighting discrepancies and writing down timelines, fueled not by anger, but by determination. This wasn't just about punishing her. It was about reclaiming my identity. I realized how much I had let others dictate my worth, and for the first time, I was asserting control over my own narrative. That realization carried me forward like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Danielle's confidence grew bolder. She invited relatives to her new house, throwing parties filled with laughter and staged perfection. Photos of her smiling in front of her home flooded social media, while I sat in my tiny apartment answering calls from creditors. Relatives began calling me bitter, jealous, even cruel, parroting Danielle's version of the story. The sting of their betrayal cut deeply, but instead of fighting back with words, I poured my energy into the case. Silence became my shield. While Danielle flaunted stolen glory, I quietly built the framework that would eventually unravel her facade. The hardest part was facing my parents again. When I told them I had spoken to a lawyer, their expressions hardened. My father accused me of destroying family bonds over money, while my mother tearfully asked how I could put my sister's future at risk. I reminded them that Danielle had destroyed mine first, but my words fell flat. They refused to acknowledge the reality of what she had done. That night, I walked out of their house, knowing something inside me had shifted. I no longer needed their approval. It hurt, but I understood that clinging to their validation would only drag me back into invisibility. As the investigation deepened, I discovered Danielle's fraud went far beyond the mortgage. She had opened credit cards, taken out personal loans, even leased a luxury car, all in my name. The weight of her deception was staggering. Mr. Collins urged me to report everything, assuring me that a strong case would protect my financial future and hold her accountable. I signed the documents with shaking hands, realizing the point of no return had passed. There would be consequences. For her and for me, but the alternative was letting her erase me completely. I couldn't allow that. Not anymore. The authorities moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, Danielle was contacted for questioning. She called me, her voice dripping with outrage. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed, as though I had stolen something from her. I calmly told her, "You did this to yourself." For the first time, I didn't waver. Her anger no longer controlled me. That moment was a turning point, not because I had defeated her, but because I realized I didn't need her approval or my family's support to stand firm. My strength came from within, and from the friends who had seen my worth long before I had. When word spread about the investigation, my family's silence was deafening. Relatives who had once mocked me avoided calling, unsure what to say. My parents grew cold, speaking in clipped tones when they had to. It was as though I had violated some sacred rule by refusing to be Danielle's safety net. And yet, amid the isolation, I felt lighter. The fear that had once consumed me was replaced with clarity. I had chosen myself for the first time, and no amount of family disapproval could undo that choice. It was lonely, but it was honest, and honesty mattered more than pretending everything was fine. As the legal wheels turned, I began focusing on rebuilding what Danielle had damaged. I met with financial advisors, disputed fraudulent accounts, and worked tirelessly to repair my credit. The process was exhausting, but each small victory, one account cleared, one debt removed, felt like a piece of myself being restored. Sarah stood by me through it all, reminding me that resilience isn't about never breaking, but about rebuilding stronger. Her faith in me kept me moving forward, even when I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down. Slowly, I began to believe I was capable of more than survival. I could thrive. Ironically, the house Danielle had bought with my identity became a focal point in the case. Because the loan was fraudulently obtained, the legal system had to decide what would happen. Danielle assumed she would keep it, even boasting that I wouldn't dare take it away. But Mr. Collins explained that since the property was purchased under my name, I had legal rights to it. I didn't dare imagine what that could mean. Me, a homeowner? After everything she had done, could I truly turn her greatest scam into my own fresh start? The thought was both surreal and empowering. The hearings dragged on for months, filled with paperwork, tense confrontations, and endless waiting. But each time I sat across from Danielle in those sterile rooms, I felt my resolve harden. She tried everything, pleading, accusing, even crying in front of the judge, but the evidence spoke louder than her theatrics. I kept my composure, answering questions calmly, refusing to let her manipulations shake me. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving, to myself and to everyone who had underestimated me, that I was not invisible. I was not the background character. I was the author of my own story, and Danielle no longer held the pen. The final hearing was the moment everything came full circle. Danielle sat across from me, arms folded, her once confident smirk replaced with a nervous twitch. The judge laid out the findings clearly. Multiple counts of identity theft, forgery, and fraud tied directly to her. Danielle tried to interrupt, claiming I had agreed to help her, but the forged signatures and fraudulent loan applications told the truth. When the verdict came, she was ordered to repay damages and faced probation along with mandatory financial counseling. The house, however, was declared legally mine since the mortgage had been approved under my verified name. I sat in stunned silence as the gavel struck, realizing the nightmare had finally shifted into justice. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. For so long, I had carried the weight of being dismissed, overlooked, and exploited. Now, I walked with dignity, not because I had destroyed my sister, but because I had reclaimed myself. Danielle glared at me as if I had betrayed her, but I didn't return the stare. Her opinion no longer mattered. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for recognition or approval. I was simply living in the truth that I had worth, I had strength, and that I no longer needed to shrink myself for anyone else's comfort. Taking ownership of the house felt surreal. Standing in the doorway, keys in hand, I remembered how Danielle had boasted about her dream home. Now, it was mine, not through scheming, but through resilience and patience. I decided to keep it, not as a trophy of revenge, but as a symbol of survival. Every room reminded me of the lies she had spun, but with each renovation, each small change I made, I replaced her chaos with my peace. Friends came to help paint and furnish, filling the space with laughter that was genuine, not performative. Slowly, the house transformed into a home, one built on truth rather than deception. My relationship with my parents never fully recovered. They continued to side with Danielle, insisting I had been too harsh. At first, their disapproval cut deeply, but over time, I stopped trying to win them back. I realized I couldn't force people to see me differently if they were committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I invested in relationships that nurtured growth. Friends who saw my worth, colleagues who respected my diligence, and a community that valued honesty. Letting go of my family's validation was painful, but it freed me from chains I hadn't realized I was dragging for years. Sometimes loss is the first step toward true independence. Danielle's downfall was quieter than I expected. She sold off her luxury car, moved into a small rental, and avoided family gatherings where whispers of her fraud lingered. She never apologized, never admitted wrongdoing, but her silence spoke volumes. For once, she wasn't the center of attention. She was the cautionary tale. I didn't gloat, nor did I reach out. I simply moved forward, no longer bound by her choices. There's a strange kind of peace in realizing you don't need closure from someone else to heal. Closure comes when you decide to stop waiting for it. The greatest victory wasn't keeping the house or repairing my credit. It was discovering myself in the process. I learned that being reliable doesn't mean being invisible. My steadiness wasn't something to be dismissed. It was the very thing that saved me. What once felt like a burden, my seriousness, my caution, my discipline, had become my armor. Danielle had tried to weaponize those qualities against me, but they became the foundation of my strength. That realization reshaped how I saw myself, not as the forgotten sibling, but as someone capable of building a future on my own terms. Over time, the noise around me faded. Relatives who once gossiped slowly stopped calling, but I didn't mind. I found fulfillment in the quiet victories, paying off debts, nurturing friendships, planting flowers in the yard of my new home. Life wasn't dramatic or glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time, that was enough. I no longer measured myself against Danielle or sought my parents' approval. My story was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was right to stand tall, even when no one else believed in me. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if Danielle regrets what she did. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But her choices no longer define me. What defines me now is resilience, integrity, and the quiet strength that carried me through when everything else fell apart. People often assume revenge means destruction, but I've learned the sweetest revenge is rebuilding, stronger than before. Danielle lost her illusions, but I gained my freedom. That trade was worth everything. When I stand in my living room now, sunlight pouring through the windows, I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. This house, once a symbol of betrayal, has become a sanctuary. Every corner holds reminders of what I overcame, the fear, the doubt, the loneliness. Yet those reminders don't haunt me, they empower me. I survived, I fought, and I built something lasting. My sister may have tried to steal my future, but in the end I took it back, piece by piece, until it was entirely mine. That's the life I live now, not invisible, not overshadowed, but fully present in my own story. So if there's one lesson I've carried from this journey, it's this: never underestimate the quiet ones. We may not seek the spotlight, but we know how to endure. And endurance, more than charm or theatrics, is what truly builds a life. Danielle's story ended in whispers, but mine continues in the steady rhythm of days lived with dignity. And every time I lock the door to my home, I remind myself that strength isn't loud, it's the quiet decision to never let anyone steal your worth again.